On May 28, 1959, a Soviet criminal investigation into the deaths of 9 ski hikers in the northern Ural Mountains was formally closed. The final report stated that the cause of the event was a spontaneous power of nature which the hikers were unable to overcome. The case files were sent to a secret archive, and for the next 30 years, the details of what occurred on the slopes of Kholat-Syakh, a mountain whose name translates from the local Mansi language as Dead Mountain, remained officially unexplained. The core of the mystery is a sequence of documented facts. In the middle of the night, 9 experienced mountaineers cut their way out of their tent, walked into a sub-zero blizzard without proper clothing or footwear, and died from hypothermia and a series of catastrophic internal injuries inconsistent with a simple hiking accident. The expedition was planned and led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute in Sverdlovsk. He assembled a group of 10, comprised mostly of fellow students and recent graduates from the institute. The group included 8 men and 2 women, all of whom were accomplished skiers and hikers. They held Grade 2 certification for winter trekking, and the successful completion of this journey would have elevated them to Grade 3, the highest qualification available to civilian athletes in the Soviet Union at that time. Their experience is a critical factor. They were not novices susceptible to common errors of judgment in a wilderness environment. The group was cohesive, well equipped for the conditions, and operating with the full sanction of their university sports club. The objective was a 16-day, 300-kilometer expedition across the remote northern Urals of Sverdlovsk Oblast. The final destination was Gora Otorten, a mountain approximately 10 kilometers north of the location where the group would meet their end. The route was designated Category 3, the most difficult classification, undertaken in February, the harshest month of the year in the region. The journey was also dedicated to the 21st Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, a common practice for significant undertakings in that era. The expedition was meticulously planned, with its route and roster approved by the Sverdlovsk City Route Commission on the 8th of January, 1959. The group departed from the city of Sverdlovsk by train on the 23rd of January. On the 25th of January, they arrived in the town of Ivdel, the last major settlement on their route. From there, they traveled by truck to Vijay, a small Lori village which served as the final outpost of civilization before the vast, uninhabited taiga. On the 27th of January, they began the skiing portion of their trek, moving north toward the mountains. The following day, the 28th of January, one member of the expedition, Yuri Yudin, was forced to turn back. He suffered from several health ailments, including rheumatism and a congenital heart defect, and severe joint pain made it impossible for him to continue. His departure was the last time any of the 9 remaining hikers were seen alive by an outside witness. The final days of the group can be reconstructed from the diaries and developed film recovered from cameras found at their last campsite. On the 31st of January, the 9 hikers reached the edge of a highland area and began their approach to the mountains. In a wooded valley at the base of the incline, they established a small supply cache, or labaz, stowing surplus food and equipment that would be needed for their return journey. On the morning of the 1st of February, they left the shelter of the tree line and began to move up and across the pass. Their plan was likely to traverse the pass and make camp on the opposite, more sheltered side. However, diary entries describe worsening weather conditions. Visibility decreased significantly due to heavy snow and high winds. Navigational errors caused the group to deviate from their intended route, moving west toward the summit of Kholat-Syakh. Realizing their mistake, they made the decision to pitch their tent on the exposed mountain slope, approximately 1.5 kilometers from the relative safety of the forest below. On the evening of the 1st of February, 1959, The 9 hikers set up their tent on the eastern slope of Kholat-Syakh. Photographs recovered from their cameras show the group digging into the snow to create a level platform and shield the tent from the wind. Inside, they ate their last meal, which medical examiners would later determine was consumed 6 to 8 hours before their deaths. After this point, the documented record ceases. The events that followed have been pieced together entirely from the physical evidence discovered by search parties weeks later. The first indication of a critical event was the state of the tent itself. It had been methodically cut and torn open from the inside. The slashes were large enough for a person to crawl through. 9 sets of footprints were found in the snow outside the tent, leading away from the mountain and downhill toward the distant tree line. The nature of these footprints provided the first confounding piece of evidence. The tracks were made by individuals who were either barefoot, wearing only socks, or in a single boot. The group's boots and outerwear were found neatly arranged inside the abandoned tent. The pattern of the footprints leading away from the camp was also noted by investigators. For the first 500 meters, the tracks were orderly, descending the slope in a relatively straight line. They were consistent with individuals walking at a normal pace, not running in a chaotic panic. This suggests the initial departure from the tent was a controlled, if urgent, action. After 500 meters, the tracks disappeared, covered by snow that had fallen since the incident. The trail led searchers to the edge of the forest, 1.5 kilometers northeast of the tent. There, under a large Siberian pine, they found the remains of a small fire. Near the extinguished embers lay the first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishenko. Both were stripped down to their underwear. Their hands and feet showed signs of frostbite and minor burns, suggesting they had desperately tried to warm themselves at the fire. High above them, branches on the pine tree were broken up to a height of 5 meters, indicating that at least one member of the group had climbed the tree. The purpose of this action is unknown. Possibilities include an attempt to get a view of the tent, to seek shelter from the wind, or to escape a perceived threat on the ground. 3 more bodies were discovered between the pine tree and the campsite. At 300 meters from the tree lay the group's leader, Igor Dyatlov. Further up the slope, at 480 meters, was Zinaida Kolmogorova. The third, Rustam Slobodin, was found at 630 meters from the pine. The positions of their bodies, all oriented in the direction of the tent, suggested they had died while attempting to return to the shelter they had abandoned. They were more fully dressed than the 2 by the fire, but still inadequately equipped for the conditions, which included temperatures between -25 to -30 degrees Celsius and a blowing storm. The search for the remaining 4 hikers continued for more than 2 months. As the winter snow began to melt, their bodies were finally located on May 4th. They were found under 4 meters of compacted snow in a ravine, approximately 75 meters deeper into the woods from the Siberian pine. These 4, Nikolai Thibaut Brignol, Lyudmila Dubenina, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Alexander Kolevatov, were better dressed than the others. Evidence suggests a period of survival after the initial incident. Some of the clothing worn by the 4 in the ravine had been taken from the bodies of those who had died earlier. Lyudmila Dubenina, for example, had her foot wrapped in a piece of Yuri Krivonishenko's woolen trousers. This act of salvaging clothing from the dead implies that at least some of the survivors remained lucid and were making rational, albeit desperate, attempts to stay alive. They had also attempted to construct a den or shelter in the snow of the ravine. The final scene in the ravine presents the most disturbing and inexplicable evidence of the entire case. The physical condition of these last 4 bodies fundamentally altered the understanding of the incident, shifting the narrative from a tragic accident to a deeply perplexing mystery. It was clear that they had not simply succumbed to the cold. The search for the Dyatlov group began on the 20th of February, 1959. Dyatlov had agreed to send a telegram to the Ural Polytechnical Institute Sports Club upon the group's return to Vizhai, expected no later than the 12th of February. When no message arrived, there was little initial concern, as delays were common on such expeditions. It was only at the insistence of the hikers' families that a formal search was organized. The first search teams consisted of volunteer students and teachers. Soon, the army and militia forces were involved, employing planes and helicopters to survey the vast, empty landscape. On the 26th of February, a pilot spotted the abandoned tent on Kholat-Syakh. The initial autopsies were conducted on the first 5 bodies found. The medical examiner concluded that all 5 had died of hypothermia. One hiker, Rustam Slobodin, was found to have a small, 6-centimeter crack in his skull, but this injury was not considered fatal. At this stage of the investigation, the official cause of death for the entire group was presumed to be exposure to the elements. The evidence, though unusual, did not conclusively point to foul play. The leading hypothesis was that the hikers had been forced from their tent by a minor snowslide or the fear of one, become disoriented in the storm, and frozen to death before they could find their way back. The discovery of the final 4 bodies in the ravine in May necessitated a new and more complex inquiry. Medical examination revealed injuries of a completely different nature. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had suffered a major skull fracture. Semyon Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina both had multiple fractured ribs, described as major chest trauma. The examining physician, Dr. Boris Vozrojdeny, stated in his report that the force required to inflict such damage would be extremely high, comparable to the force of a direct impact from a speeding automobile. Crucially, he noted that the bodies displayed no significant external wounds corresponding to these internal injuries. It was as if they had been crushed by an immense, uniform pressure. Adding to the mystery were the soft tissue injuries observed on 3 of these 4 bodies. Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, part of her lips, facial tissue, and a fragment of her skull bone. Zolotaryov was missing his eyeballs, and Alexander Kolevatov was missing his eyebrows. Dr. Vozrojdeny concluded that these injuries occurred post-mortem and were likely the result of putrefaction and scavenging by small animals, as the bodies had been lying in a stream of running water under the snow for nearly 3 months. Further forensic tests on the hikers' clothing revealed that some garments showed elevated levels of beta radiation. The source of this radiation was never determined. The formal investigation was closed just 3 weeks after the last bodies were found, with the cause of death attributed to an unknown compelling natural force. Over the decades, numerous theories have been proposed to explain this sequence of events. These can be broadly categorized. One set of theories posits a natural phenomenon. The most prominent of these is an avalanche. A 2019 reinvestigation by Russian authorities and a separate 2021 study by Swiss scientists concluded that a small delayed slab avalanche was the most likely cause. According to this model, a slab of heavy snow slid onto the tent, causing the initial injuries and forcing the group to cut their way out and retreat to what they perceived as a safe distance. The theory is contested. Critics point out that the slope was not steep enough for a typical avalanche. The hikers' tracks leading away from the tent were not consistent with a panicked flight, and the experienced group would have been unlikely to camp in a known avalanche path. Other natural explanations include a katabatic wind, a sudden violent blast of cold, dense air rushing down the slope that destroyed the camp and caused disorientation, or infrasound generated by wind patterns around the mountain, which can induce feelings of intense panic and dread in humans. A second category of theories involves military or state involvement. Investigators considered an attack by the local Mansi people, but this was quickly dismissed. There were no tracks other than those of the hikers, and the nature of the injuries was not consistent with a human assault. A more enduring theory suggests the hikers inadvertently entered a secret military testing zone. This could account for the powerful concussive force that caused the internal injuries, perhaps from a parachute mine or another experimental weapon. It would also explain the presence of radiation and the strange orange spheres reported in the sky by another group of hikers 50 kilometers south on the same night. Lev Ivanov, the chief investigator in 1959, stated in a 1990 newspaper article that he had been ordered by high-ranking regional officials to dismiss all testimony regarding these spheres and to close the case quickly. This admission has fueled speculation of a government cover-up for more than 60 years. The facts of the Dyatlov Pass incident remain largely undisputed, yet they resist a single, coherent explanation. 9 seasoned hikers, in a moment of apparent crisis, abandoned their only shelter. They did so in an orderly fashion, walking into lethal cold without adequate protection. Some froze to death while trying to return. Others survived longer, only to perish in a ravine from injuries that medical science has struggled to explain. The evidence points toward both rational, survival-oriented behavior and a flight from an unidentifiable, overwhelming force. The official verdict from 1959, attributing the deaths to a compelling natural force, is precise in its language but offers no true resolution. It is a statement of profound ambiguity, acknowledging a power sufficient to defeat 9 capable human beings, but giving that power no name. The file is closed, but the questions endure. The silence of the mountain slope continues to hold the final, unrecorded moments of the Dyatlov group, preserving their story not as a solved case, but as a permanent and deeply unsettling mystery.